Hey, I'm super excited to have David Ehrlich on with me today. I've been in the podcast arena for a long time. I certainly don't profess to know everything, and monetizing and advertising is one area that I'm just like, I just want to refer to somebody else. So I've been looking to have someone on the show for a long time. It came across Podgo. And of course, I've heard of AdvertiseCast.com as well. And seeing as you're the director of publisher success at AdvertiseCast, I was really thrilled to have you on and kind of help me and the audience navigate this space.
Yeah, Lyndsay, thanks so much for having me on the show today.
So when it comes to podcast advertising, I don't know which one to ask you first. Like, what types are there? Are there any like myths about podcast advertising?
Yeah,
Like conception versus reality.
Exactly. I think that conception versus reality is if you build it, they will come. There's so many podcasts out there, and you have to realize only 1% of podcasts average over 37,000 listens per episode. And the stat that I like to quote is only 500 podcasts generate 50% of revenue in the podcasting industry.
That's crazy.
And that's the thing about it. That's the top 500 podcasts. But on the other hand, if you and I, when we finish this podcast, no matter who you are, when you're listening, when you press publish to your RSS feed, it is alongside all of those top 500 podcasts. Every major network, every major celebrity, every major brand. So when you're talking about your audience, one listen equals one listen. Because no matter what, you're going to the app, you're going to, your podcast that you subscribe to or you just found out about. So one listen equals one listen. And that's the cool thing about podcast advertising is, whether you're a major brand or a major celebrity or, have a major show, or if you're just starting out, your listener is listening to your podcast the same way. So for an advertiser, it is equated to the same.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have. To me, I'm kind of like, if you're not the top like elite and you're not getting a million downloads per episode, then you're fat out of luck when it comes to monetizing and advertising. Like I think a lot of people think that either that or the opposite, right? They're like, oh, I just built a podcast, so I'm gonna like monetize and make millions.
Exactly. I think that's where we see a lot of the latter, where people are like, I have 20 listens, so where's my money?
I know.
I think that, yes, one listen is one listen, but also maybe if you're not at 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 listens, maybe you have to drop your rate. AdvertiseCast just released a report this month that the average CPM is $25. CPM is cost per melee, cost per thousand. So that's a marketing metric. So people pay per thousand listens. So that's kind of what you're seeing in the market.
Gotcha. And so just so we kind of understand, because I think there's misconceptions too on what podcast advertising even means. What different types are there? Like how about like what are our options, I guess?
Yeah. So kind of the way that it started was with baked in ads. And I think that what really, obviously podcasting was around for a while, but Serial and their campaign with MailChimp really skyrocketed podcast advertising into the public eye because that was so successful, but it was baked in. And baked in means that it's in your file, it's in your RSS feed, it's never going to go anywhere, it's there. So the next one is then dynamically inserted. So a dynamically inserted ad is something that a lot of the host providers have now provided. Sometimes it's with an upgraded plan. Some of the hosting services have it, some don't. Libsyn does have it. Short plug for Libsyn there.
I use Libsyn.
What you're able to, there we go. And what you're able to do is you're able to kind of have an ad break and then insert your ad. So let's say you're doing a holiday campaign, it will only run around that holiday. And then you can put ads into your back catalog. So if you have evergreen content like this, because it doesn't matter if you're listening to this live or in a few months, this is evergreen content, you can then back sell your catalog. And then you also have programmatic. So programmatic is maybe that studio produced ad that goes into either an ad break or a pre-roll spot as well. And then obviously there's pre-rolled ads and mid-rolled ads and then credit ads. And then to add on top of that, there's also the host-read ads versus studio-produced or producer,
Right.
read. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice podcast advertising that sometimes
Okay.
can be overwhelming for a podcaster
It
to be
does feel
like, where do I
overwhelming.
start? But obviously, host-read is the one that has come to dominate the industry because it makes sense that podcast advertising is so effective because of host-read advertising.
Right.
Because it's that choice plus immersion. You're choosing to listen to this podcast and you're immersing yourself in their content. So today, when you listen to this show, you're choosing to listen to Lyndsay because maybe someone recommended her show. Maybe you listened to a lot of these episodes before and you like what you've heard in past episodes. But when you recommend something to me,
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to you. I know
Right.
you as my host, right? Like I know that if you recommend something, I'm going to go try it out. So when you say, check out this product, I'm listening to you in my headphones. I've listened to you forever. It's like, people have these really intimate relationships with the podcast host that they listen to their shows because it feels like you're talking to your friends. That's why we all
Yeah.
love podcasts. And there's also this strange dynamic where if you, in any other medium, you're on social media, you're scrolling, you see an ad, it's like almost a little creepy that they're able to target you and say, I know that you clicked on this pair of shoes, and not only that pair of shoes, but the blue ones on this site, and I'm going to redirect you to that. And you're like, that's kind of crazy. But so you just keep scrolling. But on podcasts, there's this relationship between the host, the advertiser, and the listener, where the listener actually approves of it. A lot of podcasters are worried, I don't want to do ads because I feel like I'm selling out. We hear that a lot. We hear that a
Oh,
lot from podcasters of, I want my content to be pristine. I don't want my listeners to go away. But listeners understand it. And I think that the best
yeah.
ads
Ads are
are really,
everywhere
but
for
the best ads
everything.
are, integrated well into the content,
Yes.
right? So today, if you had an ad, we don't have an ad for a monetization service, but we're talking about one. But if you had an ad for, let's say we're talking in our microphones or something relevant to your podcast or even relevant to your content that you can weave into,
Mm-hmm.
the story of your episode, you're able to keep your listener engaged. You're able to say,
Yeah.
hey, you're listening to this content, and the best host read ads are able to, especially on comedy podcasts. I love how they, make some jokes in their ad reads, and you're able to, pull your listener in and not have that cheap, sellout feeling that some podcasters are worried about.
That makes sense. And it feels more like an endorsement and like a natural conversation that, like, I'm just recommending something to a friend of mine. It's kind of like that same vibe. But I don't even
Yeah,
mind listening. Like, if I'm listening to a podcast, it doesn't bother me when there's a pause in the middle of it and there's like, this is brought to you by blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm like, okay, I know it's going to be 30 seconds. And sometimes it might
yeah.
be relevant to me. And if it is, perfect. Right.
But I think that
Um,
when it's studio produced, sometimes you lose that edge. But I think that everyone loves host read ads because you're listening to
mhm,
this person talk. You're
yeah.
choosing, the listener is choosing to listen to this host. It's not like if I'm swiping on social media and I see a random
Right.
promoted post from someone I don't even follow, I'm like, who is this? Why is this
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
promoted to me? But if I hear an ad in a podcast I listen to, I'll be like, okay, this person, approved this brand to be on their show. Let me, or my phone's in my pocket or on the counter while I'm cooking and I can't get to it to skip it.
I know. Right. So just, I want to make sure I understand this accurately. So I understand the dynamic ad roll where it's kind of like, it just, I'm assuming it just slides in at whatever minute you say to on like
Yeah.
all the episodes, or can you pick only so many episodes or new episodes? Like how much flexibility do you have for those dynamic ads?
Well, it's also how the advertiser's buying it, right? A lot of
Oh,
times, so people love AdvertiseCast, and AdvertiseCast helps so many indie podcasters because the sales team over here has the relationships with the ad industry and the media
mm,
buyers. And so because of that, you're not going as one podcast, you're going with the whole weight of AdvertiseCast behind you.
oh, I get it
And
now.
exactly, because it's almost, this aggregation of, hey, AdvertiseCast represents so many podcasts.
Right.
And now with Podgo, you're able to have, shows of under 5,000 listens, which is now being called the Emerging Podcast Program. So the Emerging Podcast Program allows podcasts with under 5,000 listens to also, be thrown into that pool of, hey, also see if you can get me any ads as well.
Right.
And so if an advertiser says, you know what, we only really want current content, we only want new episodes, and not only that, we want a different ad read on each episode, then maybe you can't do your backlog catalog. But some shows, like I was saying, a lot of the ones that have evergreen content, a lot of times it's true crime, or a movie review podcast. If you're doing a movie review podcast, that movie isn't changing, or if you're doing classic movies, it's not changing. So then you're able to go and say, hey, I'm selling my back catalog.
So many nuances.
Yeah.
So like, let's say someone has had a podcast for a year and they've kind of they've been there, done that a little bit. What is a good place to start? Is there a certain type of advertising that's a good place to start? Or, is there a right way and a wrong way?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be biased here and say that looking at AdvertiseCast is a great first step. But I think people also underestimate their ability to go out. And maybe you're not going to go out and sell to a Fortune 500 brand, but maybe the pizza place around the corner is looking for something, especially if you're doing local content.
Right.
I see, especially, I see some small sports podcasts. So if you're covering your home team, maybe, okay, you're not getting listens from across the world, but strangely enough, a lot of your listens are coming from not only your state, but your city.
Yeah.
So if you're seeing that, you're like, wait a second, if all my listens are coming from my city, then I can go out and maybe sell this to local advertising, because, hey, that's something that the big guys can't do. They can't go to these mom and pop shops that have never even thought about podcast advertising because it's so unachievable for them. Because, to do that at a major brand, that makes sense, because if you're a global brand, of course, podcast advertising makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that people also underestimate what value a small listening has. So if you were going to go into the town square today and 500 people were standing there, and you were going up on your box saying like, hey, I'm talking to all you guys right now. If you were in an auditorium talking to 500 people is a lot of people.
Totally.
So when you get 500 listeners on your podcast, sometimes people are like, I only have 500 listeners. Shows have thousands and thousands of listeners, but 500 listeners is still 500 listens. Like that can still have value. And maybe it's not job quitting money, like you were saying, that some people think, hey, I started a podcast a month ago, where's my money? Maybe it's not job quitting money, but a lot of people spend 4 to 5 hours a week researching, recording, editing their show, has spent money on a microphone, spend money on editing software, maybe even pay an external partner to edit their shows. So if you're spending money on this hobby, sometimes it's nice to get some ads,
recoup those costs for sure,
cover the cost.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Helps you keep the hobby going, but maybe not job quitting yet.
Yeah, and I feel like it puts you on another playing field. I don't know. I know I thought about it for a long time, but I've never. I'm just too fearful of, I don't know, of dabbling in it. Now, what I know, obviously, you're an agency, and so I guess I want you to explain like how that works, because some people sort of feel like they have to go out and get those sponsors, and then they're like, what stats do I have to give them? What sales pitch do I have to give them? What do I even ask for to have them have an ad? And it just feels like there's this overwhelming load of to do if you are doing it by yourself. So what is that difference, I guess?
So in AdvertiseCast, there's kind of right now there's 2 routes.
Okay.
Traditionally, AdvertiseCast has worked with shows over 5,000 listens per episode. So I'd say when you get over 5,000, you're able to have a little more white glove service where, you'll get onboarded onto the platform, have a little more information provided around what type of ads you want, what you're looking for. Definitely, as more information you can provide, the better. Information on the host, information about your demographic, information about your listeners. That's always great stuff to have, especially when you're going into a sales meeting.
Absolutely.
And on the other side, there's also this emerging podcast bundle. Like I said, it came over with the acquisition of Podgo, where if you're under 5,000, and a lot of podcasts are, you're able to apply and you're kind of sold in the aggregate bundle of all the shows. So if you're under 5,000, if you're thinking, well, I can't apply because my show's not big enough, well, you do qualify as an emerging publisher. And as an emerging podcast, you're able to join the program where, you are also 100% in control of what brands and products are promoted alongside your voice. I think a lot of people want to make sure that, because like we were saying about that sellout feeling, they don't want to accept a campaign that's too off from their podcast, right? Like you want it to be in line with what you're thinking,
right?
Or maybe
that makes
if it's
sense.
a product you don't, if it's a product you don't endorse, and all of a sudden you're like, why am I getting an ad? An ad for this? You know your content best.
Yeah, it's like me having an ad for protein bars.
Yeah,
I have nothing to do with health or fitness, and it would be like, wait, what? That makes sense.
Yeah, no, but you're talking about, you've thought about it before. Validation is a big thing in the podcast advertising spot, especially for beginning publishers. And I know I'm talking a lot towards the minus. Not the minus, but towards the shows that have under 5,000. There's definitely, there's definitely a lot of money to be out there for above 5,000. But when you have a small podcast and you're not making that job quitting money, that validation is big to say, hey, I got an ad today. I spend all this time doing my podcast and I got an ad. I'm a, quote unquote real podcaster, even though you're a real podcaster just by publishing to the RSS feed.
Oh, totally.
But it's different, right? If you're around the dinner table,
perception, right?
If you're around the dinner table, you get to say, I had an ad this week for this company.
Yeah, that is so cool. Now, when someone kind of goes to AdvertiseCast or starts in the advertising space, what are some good expectations or goals to set for yourself? Because I know when you have no expectation, you just don't know what, you know what I mean? Like, am I going to get $100 a month, or, what do I have to put into it time wise? What should we be thinking about before we even start?
Yeah, I think the first thing is always to manage expectations. The sales process is always very slow. To get the first ad sometimes can be a little while, whether it's a few weeks, but everyone thinks it's going to come within an hour.
Oh, really? That's crazy.
Well, not within an hour.
There's legwork for sure.
They feel like it's going to come soon. So I think that's to set expectations, make sure that that the sales process takes time. And then also if you've never done an ad read, definitely listen to your favorite podcasters, or go out and listen to some of the top 10 podcasts to hear what they're doing. And you're a consumer yourself. Like, if you're listening to an ad and you're like, okay, I like what they did there. Don't listen to it as someone that's trying to buy the product or someone that's just listening to the show. Listen to it as a host, as a podcaster. Okay, what are they doing here? How are they reading this? How are they including this content, or how are they including the content into the ad, or, how are they bringing this in? And then you can kind of find your own voice. You can find your own voice in your ads of saying, are you going to change up your tone? A lot of people in their first ad read, all of a sudden they're talking like this. All of us, this is very much a dialect of, hey, we're speaking. And then they go into an ad, they're like, hello, today's episode is brought to you by this ad. And you're like,
the radio voice?
What just happened to the host? Like, did they just get possessed by a robot? So I think it's also, make sure that you do your work of knowing how to read a script, or just knowing what you need to put down for yourself. I like to think in bullet points. So if I'm doing an ad, I look at bullet points. I don't write full sentences, because I personally know if I'm looking at a piece of paper with a full sentence, I'm going to be robotic. That's just how I think. And I like sometimes to just put it in bullet points and just know kind of how I'm going to flow the script and kind of change it each time.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Or then you speak more naturally, right?
Yeah. Or another great tip that I've seen is people break at commas, but we actually don't speak in commas. So we speak a little bit past punctuation. So sometimes a tip that I've seen before is you read all the way through and then actually put slashes in when you take a breath versus taking a breath at the punctuation, because a lot of times we just go all the way through. Even if there's a period, we're going to keep talking. So it's just an interesting way of finding your own way, and everyone thinks differently, and that's okay. But definitely, I would, if that was your first ad read, just go in with a little practice, even if it's in front of the mirror.
That is a great tip. And what are the lengths that people are doing for whether it's ad insertions or the host is speaking it? Is there like a right time frame and a like too long, or?
Usually it's 30, 60, and 90. And a lot of times the advertiser will buy the spot. So an advertiser will buy a 60-second spot, which means that as a publisher, as a host, you have to, read the ad for 60 seconds. Or minimum of 50 seconds.
For sure. And what are some of the mistakes that beginner advertisers are doing so that we can avoid them?
I think you want to make sure the call to action is clear. Go to this website, use this promo code. I think you want to make sure that you get the call to action correct, or if you say the brand's correct. I think I've seen a lot of small mistakes. They're just a little silly. Saying the brand name wrong, saying the wrong code.
Dang.
But that's just
human nature, I guess. Nerves.
That's human nature, but it doesn't happen often.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, if that does happen, it's with the only time I've seen it is if it's someone's very, very first ad.
Yeah. The kind of mistake you do once.
Exactly.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So how do the logistics work? Because this is part of the question that I had from before, is that like if you're baked in and then you have like the ad rolls for whether it's the beginning or at the outro or in the middle, you're inserting that audio into your interview audio and then uploading it to Libsyn or whatever your host is. How is that different than baked in?
So that's, if you're doing that, that's baked in. But
it is.
An ad and a dynamic ad insertion is on Libsyn. You're able to demarcate a ad break.
Yeah, that part I do get. I just wasn't sure if baked was different than the actual ad insertion when it's like,
So it's a little different because the ad insert is you're inserting it with the break versus baked in is it's in the RSS feed. It is in your file. So it's in the
MP3 file or whatever before you upload it to the.
Exactly.
So when you have, besides the dynamic I totally get, but when you have, you match up, I'm assuming an advertiser with you, like, do you have to create the assets? Do they create the assets? Or are there variations of?
So a lot of times when you get an ad proposal, and the way it works in AdvertiseCast is you get included an ad proposal. You accept if you want to be part of that ad campaign or not. Sometimes that campaign can come soon. Sometimes that campaign can take a little to finalize. You'll get target air dates. So you'll say, okay, we want this on, the 3rd, the 15th, and the 21st of whatever month. And then included in that will be, a PDF with copy, with ad copy. And that copy can sometimes be a script, or more likely it will be talking points. Be sure to say this, that the product does XYZ. Be sure to include a little story about your experience with the product.
Gotcha.
A lot of the ad reads are, experiential. So they want to make sure the hosts get the product as well, especially for the larger shows. So it's like, okay, what's your address? We're going to send you it. Make sure you use it. Talk about how you liked it. For the smaller shows, sometimes they're not giving products. So for any small shows, I apologize if you're listening. But for the larger shows, of course, you want to send them the product because
that makes sense.
You want to make sure that they do a read of saying, hey, I used this yesterday and I want to let you know my experience using it. And then they'll say, use the call to action, code XYZ, go to the website, www.company.com.
So they don't actually send like an audio that they've like produced per se, and then you insert that into your, because I have heard those before.
So what that's called programmatic advertising. So those ads that are inserted are called programmatic, and Libsyn is soon to release a new programmatic, very exciting offering soon for publishers. And what that is if you're a podcast, you can say, I will accept ads at the beginning of my episode, but don't include me and you can click what categories and what type of ads you don't want to be included. I don't want political ads. I don't want, and you can say whatever else you want. And then you don't have to do anything. So you just sit there, and at the end of the month or 30 to 90 days, you'll get, money deposited into your account saying like, hey, this ran on your podcast, but you'll never know what ads run on because, right. So we listen to the same episode. It could be different because sometimes it's geo-targeted.
I didn't realize you could get that granular. That's interesting.
Podcasting. And right now it's very interesting what's going to happen because Apple is changing their privacy settings to make it a little more private. No, and in a good way for consumers. Harder for advertisers because I
always root for the marketer.
Yeah, exactly. So as a marketer myself, it definitely presents challenges. And if you look at it from a marketing standpoint, the digital ad spend has become so efficient because it's cheaper and you're able to have really, really, really targeted capabilities. But with that, the consumer is more inundated with ads. Yeah. Right. When you're on any social media or any search engine, like you're getting a lot of ads served to you. And if you're on podcast, a lot of times, what do you get? 3, maybe 4 ads? Like that's maximum. If a podcast has 4 ads,
that's a lot to me.
That's a lot, right? So most of the times you might even be the only advertiser. So podcasting definitely presents an amazing opportunity for the marketer, right? Because you're getting to the podcaster and they're also listening. Yeah. Right? When I'm scrolling, I'm like half paying attention.
Absolutely.
You're in someone's ear. You're in their ear telling you about the product. And I've bought too much stuff off of podcast advertising myself.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Some of them I sold the ad spot to. But,
that's hilarious. That's so cool. What are you seeing in the industry before we close up? Like changes that are coming up or trends?
I think that what I'm seeing in the industry is people think that podcasting is a mature industry, but I think that it's still the Wild West.
I agree.
And although it's definitely more formed than a decade ago, because there's more publishers in the space, there's also more listening players in the space. There's also more money coming into the space
and more businesses in the space.
More businesses than ever in the space. But you're also seeing brands come in for the first time. So with these new advertisers coming in, they're just learning about, okay, how do I efficiently do a podcast ad? What do I put in my ad copy? How do I get hosts on board? What do you mean that, this podcast is good for me and this is it? So a lot of marketers are still trying to figure out the best way to go about their business using podcast advertising. And I think that for small podcasters out there, there's more opportunity than ever to go out and monetize your content. And of course, I'm bullish on Libsyn and AdvertiseCast really helping out podcasters. I think that Libsyn is doing an amazing job especially with the new Libsyn 5 that was announced. So if you use Libsyn, you've seen the new UI on the website. Yep. And for AdvertiseCast, you're really able to, as an indie podcaster, go out there and without having any relationships, use the relationships that AdvertiseCast has and the amazing sales team has to sell your inventory.
It takes the stress out of it, honestly, and the time and the effort. Thank goodness. Because it's intimidating. So yeah, so great to have you, and that you're partnering with Libsyn. All of my launches that I do with my clients, they automatically sign up with Libsyn because that's what I use. So bonus.
Amazing. There we go.
I
Can we
know.
say
Now
this?
I just need an affiliate account.
I think that we can call that a host endorsement.
Yes, exactly. There you go. That's awesome. So thank you so much for these tips. My brain is exploding now with the what I should be doing. So how can people get started? Where should they go to dive in?
If you don't already have a podcast, definitely look at Libsyn as a hosting provider. And if you
Yes.
do have a podcast, whether you have, under 5,000 listens or over 5,000 listens, if you're brand new to the game or have been podcasting for years, check out AdvertiseCast. If you're looking to sell some of your ad inventory, it's definitely a very useful tool for publishers to be able to go out and keep the hobby going, or keep your passion for what you're doing going.
That's awesome. And it makes it more accessible and easier and less nerve-wracking to navigate. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's opened up my eyes and helped me understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. Before we go, I know we're still recording, but if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. I'm here to be a resource for you and your community on podcast advertising. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm
appreciate
here
it.
to help. Here for the podcasters. I'm a small podcaster myself, so maybe next time I'll tell you the story about how I started Podgo and everything about the acquisition for a follow-up episode.
That would be interesting. The inner workings. Absolutely. Thanks so much, David.
Talk more about the podcast business as a whole versus just advertising.
I know, right? It's its own ball of wax. Awesome.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Lyndsay, thank you so much for having me on. And look forward to listening to this episode back.